Study offers new twist in how the first humans evolved. A new genetic analysis of 290 people suggests that humans emerged at various times and places in Africa. Scientists have revealed a surprisingly complex origin of our species, rejecting the long-held argument that modern humans arose from one place in Africa during one period in time. By analyzing the genomes of 290 living people, researchers concluded that modern humans descended from at least two populations that coexisted in Africa for 1 million years before merging in several independent events across the continent. The findings were published on Wednesday in Nature. There is no single birthplace, said Eleanor Sri, an evolutionary archaeologist at the Max Planck Institute for Geoarchaeology in Jena, Germany, who was not involved in the new study. It really puts a nail in the coffin of that idea. Paleoanthropologists and geneticists have found evidence pointing to Africa as the origin of our species. The oldest fossils that may belong to modern humans, dating back as far as 300,000 years, have been unearthed there. So were the oldest stone tools used by our ancestors. Human DNA also points to Africa. Living Africans have a vast amount of genetic diversity compared with other people. That's because humans lived and evolved in Africa for thousands of generations before small groups with comparatively small gene pools began expanding to other continents. Within the vast expanse of Africa, researchers have proposed various places as the birthplace of our species. Early human-like fossils in Ethiopia led some researchers to look to East Africa. But some living groups of people in South Africa appeared to be very distantly related to other Africans, suggesting that humans might have a deep history there instead. Brenna Henn, a geneticist at the University of California, Davis, and her colleagues developed software to run large-scale simulations of human history. The researchers created many scenarios of different populations existing in Africa over different periods of time and then observed which ones could produce the diversity of DNA found in people alive today. We could ask what types of models are really plausible for the African continent, Dr. Henn said. The researchers analyzed DNA from a range of African groups, including the Mende, farmers who live in Sierra Leone in West Africa. The Gamas, a group descended from hunter-gatherers in Ethiopia. The Amhara, a group of Ethiopian farmers. And the Nama, a group of hunter-gatherers in South Africa. The researchers compared these Africans' DNA with the genome of a person from Britain. They also looked at the genome of a 50,000-year-old Neanderthal found in Croatia. Previous research had found that modern humans and Neanderthals shared a common ancestor that lived 600,000 years ago. Neanderthals expanded across Europe and Asia, interbred with modern humans coming out of Africa, and then became extinct about 40,000 years ago. The researchers concluded that as far back as 1 million years ago, the ancestors of our species existed in two distinct populations. Dr. Henn and her colleagues call them Stem 1 and Stem 2. About 600,000 years ago, a small group of humans budded off from Stem 1 and went on to become the Neanderthals. But Stem 1 endured in Africa for hundreds of thousands of years after that, as did Stem 2. If Stem 1 and Stem 2 had been entirely separate from each other, they would have accumulated a large number of distinct mutations in their DNA. Instead, Dr. Henn and her colleagues found that they had remained only moderately different, about as distinct as living Europeans and West Africans are today. The scientists concluded that people had moved between Stem 1 and Stem 2, pairing off to have children and mixing their DNA. The model does not reveal where the Stem 1 and Stem 2 people lived in Africa, and it's possible that bands of these two groups moved around a lot over the vast stretches of time during which they existed on the continent. About 120,000 years ago, the model indicates, African history changed dramatically. In southern Africa, people from Stem 1 and Stem 2 merged, giving rise to a new lineage that would lead to the Nama and other living humans in that region. Elsewhere in Africa, a separate fusion of Stem 1 and Stem 2 groups took place. That merger produced a lineage that would give rise to living people in West Africa and East Africa, as well as the people who expanded out of Africa. It's possible that climate upheavals forced Stem 1 and Stem 2 people into the same regions, leading them to merge into single groups. Some bands of hunter-gatherers may have had to retreat from the coast as sea levels rose, for example. Some regions of Africa became arid, potentially sending people in search of new homes. Even after these mergers 120,000 years ago, people with solely Stem 1 or solely Stem 2 ancestry appear to have survived. The DNA of the Mende people showed that their ancestors had interbred with Stem 2 people just 25,000 years ago. It does suggest to me that Stem 2 was somewhere around West Africa Dr. Hen said. She and her colleagues are now adding more genomes from people in other parts of Africa to see if they affect the models. It's possible they will discover other populations that endured in Africa for hundreds of thousands of years, ultimately helping produce our species as we know it today. Dr. Sri speculated that living in a network of mingling populations across Africa might have allowed modern humans to survive while Neanderthals became extinct. In that arrangement, our ancestors could hold on to more genetic diversity, which in turn might have helped them endure shifts in the climate or even evolve new adaptations. This diversity at the root of our species may have been ultimately the key to our success, Dr. Sri said. Oldest fossils of Homo sapiens found in Morocco, altering history of our species. Fossils discovered in Morocco are the oldest known remains of Homo sapiens, scientists reported on Wednesday, a finding that rewrites the story of mankind's origins and suggests that our species evolved in multiple locations across the African continent. We did not evolve from a single cradle of mankind somewhere in East Africa, said Philip Gunz, a paleoanthropologist at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, and a co-author of 2 new studies on the fossils, published in the journal Nature. We evolved on the African continent. Until now, the oldest known fossils of our species dated back just 195,000 years. The Moroccan fossils, by contrast, are roughly 300,000 years old. Remarkably, they indicate that early Homo sapiens had faces much like our own, although their brains differed in fundamental ways. Today, the closest living relatives to Homo sapiens are chimpanzees and bonobos, with whom we share a common ancestor that lived over 6 million years ago. After the split from this ancestor, our ancient forebears evolved into many different species, known as hominins. For millions of years, hominins remained very ape-like. They were short, had small brains and could fashion only crude stone tools. Until now, the oldest fossils that clearly belonged to Homo sapiens were discovered in Ethiopia. In 2003, researchers working at a site called Herto discovered a skull estimated to be between 160,000 and 154,000 years old. A pair of partial skulls from another site, Omokibish, dated to around 195,000 years of age, at the time making these the oldest fossils of our species. Findings such as these suggested that our species evolved in a small region, perhaps in Ethiopia or nearby in East Africa. After Homo sapiens arose, researchers believed the species spread out across the continent. Yet paleoanthropologists were aware of mysterious hominin fossils discovered in other parts of Africa that did not seem to fit the narrative. In 1961, miners in Morocco dug up a few pieces of a skull at a site called Jebel Roud. Later digs revealed a few more bones, along with flint blades. Using crude techniques, researchers estimated the remains to be 40,000 years old. In the 1980s, however, a paleoanthropologist named Jean-Jacques Hublin took a closer look at one jawbone. The teeth bore some resemblance to those of living humans, but the shape seemed strangely primitive. It did not make sense, Dr. Hublin, now at the Max Planck Institute, recalled in an interview. Since 2004, Dr. Hublin and his colleagues have been working through layers of rocks on a desert hillside at Jebel Roud. They have found a wealth of fossils, including skull bones from 5 individuals who all died around the same time. Just as important, the scientists discovered flint blades in the same sedimentary layer as the skulls. The people of Jebel Rud most likely made them for many purposes, putting some on wooden handles to fashion spears. Many of the flint blades showed signs of having been burned. The people at Jebel Rud probably lit fires to cook food, heating discarded blades buried in the ground below. This accident of history made it possible to use the flints as historical clocks. Dr. Hublin and his colleagues used a method called thermoluminescence to calculate how much time had passed since the blades were burned. They estimated that the blades were roughly 300,000 years old. The skulls, discovered in the same rock layer, must have been the same age. Despite the age of the teeth and jaws, anatomical details showed they nevertheless belonged to Homo sapiens, not to another hominin group, such as the Neanderthals. Resetting the clock on mankind's debut would be achievement enough, but the new research is also notable for the discovery of several early humans rather than just one, as so often happens, said Marta Mirazanlar, a paleoanthropologist at the University of Cambridge who was not involved in the new study. We have